There is a small green island about 33 kilometers off the coast of Brazil. From the deck of a fishing boat, it looks like nothing. Rainforest on the high ground, grey rock falling into the sea. A single white lighthouse blinking on the summit. Automatic, patient, alone. The water around it is warm. The swim would not kill you. You will never be allowed to try. The Brazilian Navy closed this island to the public almost 100 years ago, and in all that time, it has never once reopened it. To set foot on it without permission is not a fine, it is a federal crime. The island has a name that sounds like it is already apologizing. Ilha da Queimada Grande. The rest of the world uses a shorter one, Snake Island, and almost everything you have heard about it is wrong. You have seen the number, 1 snake for every square meter. 430,000 vipers boiling across a single rock, so densely packed that you could not set your foot down without landing on one. It is one of the most repeated facts on the entire internet. It is also false, not exaggerated, false. And the real story underneath it is stranger and quieter and far more fragile than the death trap version that made the island famous. So, let us take the legend apart, piece by piece, and see what is actually standing on that rock. 3 things in the next few minutes. Why a country would permanently lock away one of its own islands and send the Navy to keep its own citizens off. What truly lives there, and why the famous 1 snake per square meter number collapses the instant anyone checks it, and the part almost nobody tells you. That the most feared snakes on Earth are not multiplying, they are vanishing. And the same venom that makes them so lethal gave modern medicine one of its most important drugs. Subscribe to Impossible Lands, because the most dangerous island on the planet is also one of the most defenseless. And by the time this is over, you are going to understand why the wall around it protects the snakes far more than it protects us. Begin with the number, because the number is where the myth lives. For decades, books and articles and television specials repeated the same figure. The island holds around 430,000 snakes. 1 for every square meter of its surface. It is a perfect, horrifying image, and it has a way of crawling into your head and staying there. The floor that moves, the branch that turns out to be alive. The single misstep that ends you. It is also arithmetic that nobody bothered to do, because between 2002 and 2010, Brazilian researchers actually went and did the work. They landed on the island, under armed escort, and ran a proper mark-and-recapture study, the slow, unglamorous method of counting a wild population by catching animals, marking them, releasing them, and seeing how many turn up again. The result was not 430,000, it was somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 snakes. A follow-up a few years later leaned toward the lower end of that range. Sit with the gap for a second. The legend was off by a factor of more than 100. On an island of about 43 hectares, a realistic density works out closer to 1 snake for every 140 square meters. Crowded, yes. One of the highest concentrations of venomous snakes found anywhere on Earth, genuinely, but not a carpet, not a writhing floor. You could walk through that forest for several minutes and see nothing at all, and then, in a single clearing, see 3 of them at once, coiled in the low branches, the color of old brass. And there is a hard physical reason the number could never have been 430,000. Food. A rock that small cannot feed 500,000 predators. It never could. The snakes are limited by the same thing that limits every animal everywhere. There is only so much to eat. So where did the monster number come from? It came from the place most monsters come from. A good story, told once and then repeated forever by people who never went to look. Even the island's name carries an old human attempt to tame it. Queimada Grande means, roughly, the Great Burning. According to local accounts, people in the Lighthouse era tried to burn back the forest to clear ground for crops and failed. The trees grew back, the snakes stayed, and eventually the people left for good. The fire is right there in the name, a record of the one time humans tried to bend the place to their needs. The island won that argument a long time ago. And that, in the end, is the gap this whole story lives in. On one side, the version built for television, the writhing floor, the certain death, the 430,000. On the other, the version the researchers actually find when they climb that cleared path. A humid, ordinary-looking forest, mostly empty to the eye, holding a few thousand quiet, endangered animals that want nothing to do with you. Now the harder question. If the island is not carpeted in snakes, why is it so deadly that an entire government walled it off and never came back? For that, you have to travel back about 11,000 years to a slow catastrophe that almost no one was alive to witness. At the end of the last ice age, the sea rose. The ice that had locked up the world's water melted, the oceans climbed, and the rising water swallowed the low coast of what is now Brazil. A piece of high ground that had been connected to the mainland became surrounded. A hill became an island, and on that hill, when the water finished rising, a population of snakes was trapped. They were ordinary pit vipers, close relatives of the lanceheads that still cover the Brazilian mainland in the tens of thousands. But the mainland and the island were now two separate worlds, and they began to drift apart, not in space, but in evolution. On the mainland, those snakes lived on the forest floor, hunting rats and frogs and lizards. On the island, almost none of that existed. There were no mammals to speak of. There was little crawling on the ground worth eating. Year after year, generation after generation, the easy meals ran out. There was only one reliable food source left on that rock, and it did not stay on the ground. It flew. Twice a year, migrating birds passed over the island and dropped down into its trees to rest. For a stranded snake, those birds were the difference between a fed lineage and a dead one. This is the pressure that built the so-called monster. Understand how a normal lancehead hunts and you understand everything. A mainland lancehead is an ambush predator. It strikes a rat, injects its venom, and then lets go. It does not hold on, it waits. The rat staggers off a few meters, dies in the brush, and the snake follows the scent trail and eats at its leisure. That strategy is perfect for prey that runs. It is useless for prey that flies. Bite a bird, release it, and it does not stagger a few meters. It opens its wings, lifts off, and dies somewhere out over the ocean, lost forever. So the island snakes faced a brutal, simple problem. Kill the bird before it can leave the branch, or starve. And across thousands of years, the snakes whose venom worked fastest were the snakes that ate and survived and bred. The slow ones left no descendants. The result is the golden lancehead, Bothrops insularis, a snake that exists nowhere else on the planet. Its venom is estimated to be roughly 5 times more potent than that of its mainland cousin, and it is considered the fastest acting venom in its entire genus. It is primarily hemotoxic. It dissolves tissue, breaks down blood, and stops it from clotting. On a human being, a bite brings intense pain, swelling, internal bleeding, and the slow death of the flesh around the wound. But that ferocity was never designed for us. It was tuned, over 11,000 years, for songbirds. The golden lancehead does not chase. It waits, motionless, in the low branches, sometimes for days. And out of roughly 41 bird species that visit the island, it relies heavily on just 2 of them, small migrating birds that land to rest and never take off again. A snake the color of brass, holding perfectly still, killing a sparrow-sized bird so quickly the bird never clears the branch. That is the truth the death trap stories skip. This venom is not malice. It is a key, cut over 11,000 years to fit one very specific lock, a bird that has to die before it can spread its wings. It is worth pausing on how strange that is. Islands are engines of strange evolution. Cut a population off from the mainland for long enough, and it drifts somewhere the rest of its kind never goes. Some island animals shrink over the generations, some swell into giants. The golden lancehead did something rarer. It rebuilt its own chemistry around a calendar. Its entire year now bends toward the brief windows when the migrating birds arrive, and for the rest of the time the snakes simply wait, eating almost nothing, in a forest that offers them little else. A predator at the very top of its tiny world, and yet completely dependent on travelers who are only passing through. Take the birds away, and the most feared snake on Earth quietly starves. Which brings us back to the lighthouse, and the navy, and the closed door. People did live on Queimada Grande once. From around 1909 into the 1920s, a handful of keepers ran the lighthouse on the summit, the light that warned ships off the rocks. Then, in the 1920s, the lighthouse was automated, the keepers left, and the island was closed to civilians. It has stayed closed ever since. And here the legend creeps back in, because of course it does. The story goes that the last keeper and his family died one night when snakes poured in through the windows of their house, and that the family fled toward their boat in the dark, only to be bitten by vipers hanging from the branches overhead. It is a vivid story. It is also unverified. The naval records describe the automation of the lighthouse as a routine logistical upgrade and say nothing about a family dying. There may have been a keeper, there may have been a tragedy. But the honest answer is that we do not know, and the chilling version survives for the same reason the 400,000 number survived. It is better television than a maintenance report. What is documented is the rule that exists today, and it is stricter than almost any tourist ban in the world. The island is a federally protected conservation area. Civilians cannot land. The only people permitted ashore are the Navy, performing lighthouse maintenance, and a small number of researchers vetted by Brazil's Chico Mendes Institute for Biodiversity Conservation. And even they cannot simply show up. A research visit requires a documented safety protocol that includes a federally certified physician on the team and anti-venom carried to the island in advance, because help is hours away across open water and a serious bite does not wait. The Navy itself returns only about once a year. A small group lands at a rocky cove on the eastern side, walks a single cleared path up to the lighthouse, does the work over the course of one day, and leaves before dark. That is the entire human presence on the most feared island on Earth. A few people one day a year, with a doctor and a cooler of anti-venom, walking a path they do not step off of. And the researchers who are allowed ashore are not there for the thrill of it. They are there to count the snakes, to track whether the population is holding steady or sliding toward extinction, and to study the venom itself, drop by drop, because a substance that can stop a small bird's heart in seconds is exactly the kind of thing that, understood properly, can be turned into something that saves human ones. Every visit is a race against the heat and the light. A single day of careful work on a rock where one wrong step has consequences no nearby hospital can undo. And now the part that turns the whole horror story inside out. The golden lancehead is not a thriving menace, it is critically endangered. The species exists in one place only, that single 43-hectare rock, and its numbers have been falling. Some of the pressure is natural. An island that small can only hold so much forest, and a population that isolated, breeding only among itself for 11,000 years, carries the quiet risks of inbreeding and disease. But part of the pressure is us, because a snake found nowhere else on Earth, with a face like nothing in any pet shop, is worth a great deal to the right collector. Golden lanceheads have been smuggled off the island by wildlife traffickers, each animal reportedly worth a small fortune on the black market to private buyers. So the wall the Navy built is not really there to keep the snakes in. The snakes are not going anywhere. It is there to keep the poachers out. Every snake stolen from that island pushes a species that lives in exactly one location on the planet a step closer to living in none. The island is not a prison holding monsters. It is an intensive care ward holding the last of something, and the guards are facing outward. And if you are tempted to write that venom off as nothing but a weapon, here is the fact worth carrying out of this video. The mainland cousin of the golden lancehead, a pit viper called Bothrops jararaca, changed medicine forever. In 1965, a Brazilian scientist named Sergio Ferreira was studying that snake's venom and isolated a compound he called a bradykinin potentiating factor, a substance that affected blood pressure. That single discovery became the thread that led, through a pharmaceutical laboratory in the United States, to a drug called captopril, the first oral medication of its kind, approved in 1981. Captopril, and the family of blood pressure drugs that followed it, have since been taken by hundreds of millions of people around the world. The lineage of that medicine runs straight back to the venom of a Brazilian lancehead. The same chemistry that makes the snakes of Queimada Grande so frightening is, in a close relative, one of the most useful gifts a snake ever gave us. It is one of the quiet ironies of modern medicine. Around the world, people swallow a small pill each morning to keep their blood pressure steady, and almost none of them know that the molecule behind it was first read out of the venom of an animal their grandparents would have killed on sight. So look at the island one more time. Small, green, 33 kilometers offshore, the grey rock, the rainforest, the white lighthouse blinking over a place no living person is allowed to stand. From the boat, it still looks like a death trap holding 430,000 snakes. It is not. It is a hilltop the ocean turned into a cage 11,000 years ago, holding a few thousand of the rarest vipers on Earth, hunting two kinds of bird, slowly disappearing, and carrying in their bodies a chemistry that has already saved lives on the mainland. It was never forbidden because it is a monster. It is forbidden because it is a masterpiece. and a masterpiece that can no longer defend itself. That is the thing about the most dangerous places on Earth. The closer you look, the more often you find that the danger was never the real story. The fragility was. Subscribe, hit the bell, and I will see you on Impossible Lands.